Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV. I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you most kindly for joining us. Tonight on the program, we're going to examine two issues shaping governance and leadership selection in Nigeria. First, the anti-corruption fight in Africa's largest democracy and the world's most populous black nation. Despite years of raids, probes, and high-profile arrests, corruption remains a piling up issue as far as Nigeria is concerned, as the global community puts a spotlight by marking the anti-corruption campaign globally. Tonight on the program, we assess what Nigeria has gained, what it has lost, and why accountability still feels somewhat slow or underwhelming. We'll be speaking with Dr. Emmanuel Uche, the project manager anti-corruption at International Idea Nigeria, for insight about Nigeria's ongoing fight against graft and many of the other sundry issues that is undermining governance, or at least good governance as far as Nigerians are concerned. But first things first, let's bring you up to speed with the latest in politics.
During Wednesday's Federal Executive Council meeting in Abuja, the president said police personnel should return to frontline duties across the country. Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka has criticized what he described as a battalion-sized security detail around Tinubu, son of President Bola Tinubu. Soyinka said the level of protection reflects poor use of state resources at a time of rising insecurity and economic strain. He called for restraint and better judgment in public office. Osun State Governor Ademola Adeleke has emerged as the Accord Party's candidate for the 2026 governorship election. Electoral Committee Secretary Abdulaziz Salaudin said Adeleke secured 145 of the 150 votes cast. 5 votes were avoided. Delegates drawn from the state's 30 local government areas voted in Osogbo. The House of Representatives turned rowdy during a debate on a motion summoning the central bank governor Olaimi Cardoso over alleged non-remittance of 16.3 trillion naira. The figure covers 5.2 trillion naira in operating surplus and 11.09 trillion naira in revenue from 2016 to 2022. Public Accounts Committee Chairman Bamidele Salam accused the CBN of failing to remit funds due to the federal government. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission has arraigned former Aviation Minister Stella Odua before an Abuja High Court over alleged 2.4 billion naira fraud. Odua appeared alongside Gloria Odita on a 5-count charge bordering on fraud, obtaining by false pretense and criminal breach of trusts. The case came up on Wednesday.
Right, welcome back to the program. Let's segue to our main conversation of the evening. Dr. Emmanuel Uche, the project manager anti-corruption at International Idea Nigeria, is here to provide context as this week the world marks International Day Against Corruption. We're going to zoom in on the situation here in Nigeria, what some of the issues are, and what sort of progress we need to turn the corner as far as Nigeria's long-lasting battle with corruption is concerned. Dr. Uche, thank you so much for joining us on the program this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Right.
Always a pleasure.
This week, a lot of the attention has been on the fight against corruption from a global perspective, but you consider the data. Nigeria has always dealt with some rather poor rankings, whether it's Global Perception Index. The rankings show that Nigeria is still struggling with endemic corruption, systemic corruption. What, in your view, from your analysis, explains this gap between the loud rhetoric and this poor performance when it comes to outcome?
Thank you very much for that question. The gap between the rhetorics and the lived experience of people can be summarized as that of the challenge of integrity. The challenge of integrity. Where there is integrity deficit, people don't care what they say. People think what's important is do whatever you can to clinch power. do whatever you can to have your way. And that, for the most part, thrives on impunity. So it's a complex web of one evil, one societal ill reinforcing the other. So you make all the campaign promises, and in this part of the world, it's almost no-brainer that anyone would contest that politics basically means deceive them. And people will quickly tell you, well, that was during campaign, but what were you expecting? That was campaign, basically telling you that ab initio, nobody expected you to take the politician seriously, which basically tells us that the business of governance is too serious a business to be left alone in the hands of politicians alone.
Right.
Maybe I should stop you there.
Yeah, and give us the Nigerian context here, because we do know that corruption itself is a global phenomenon, but give us the Nigerian context here. When we talk about corruption, for most Nigerians, just zero in on corruption in government. What is your understanding of what we're dealing with here? Yes, there is obvious corruption in government, corruption in the private sector, corruption of social norms, our value system and all of that. Give us a context of what concerns you the most about what is playing out in Nigeria.
What would be most concerning regarding Nigeria's peculiar situation is the fact that, like you said, there is hardly any place in the world you can only talk about the extent to which people are corrupt or the extent to which the system, allows corruption to thrive. But it's difficult to talk in absolute terms. The challenge here is this. People in other climes could actually be far more corrupt than we are in this part of the world. And I give you the example that Hurricane Katrina opened our eyes to see that when the lights went out, in Orlando, Florida, we saw people looting in daylight. People who hitherto were considered as civil, You saw massive looting, people rushing into supermarkets once they knew the cameras were down, and they were looting massively. What does that tell you? That the Nigerian is not in any way more corrupt than any other person anywhere. The challenge is the failure and the absence of consequence, is the only incentive. Consequence or the lack of it is the only incentive for anybody to want to behave right or wrong. And that is the fundamental difference here. That people know that they can get away with anything. And it has boiled down to surname.com. Who do you know? And it's unfortunate that we had to go this route.
So you're not swayed by the high-profile corruption cases that have been on for the past 2 decades. You don't think that is enough, that there are some high-profile people who have paid the price for dipping their hands in public purse, for mismanaging public resources, for aggrandizement and so on and so forth?
I hear you loud and clear. Yes, we celebrate those cases. We celebrate the improvement in investigation. We celebrate the improvement that the country has achieved in prosecution. And of a truth, when I took over the reins of the office I currently occupy, over a decade ago, precisely 14 years ago, the situation was such that anti-corruption judges were walking anti-corruption agency prosecutors. They were walking prosecutors out of the courtroom for lack of diligence prosecution. But the intervention we have had over the years have gone a long way in building the capacity of anti-corruption and law enforcement agencies, first of all, to do their proper investigations, do undercover operations, sting operations, and to build prima facie cases. Even in case advocacy in courts, we did so much capacity building, and today we look back and we can beat our chests that yes, we share in the glory that has returned, that there is improved prosecutorial outcomes. But hear me out. Pursuing high-profile corruption cases, the mega corruption cases, is a beautiful thing, and it makes a lot of sense for the populace, especially for the West, that support us in this fight. But let's come back home. There is mega corruption, there is petty corruption. It is from petty corruption that the mega will emerge.
We have some context. When you say petty and mega, what are you talking about?
I will explain that. Yeah. Now, mega corruption talks about the high-profile cases that you see the agencies go after. Petty corruption talks about those is like micro and macroeconomics. Let me use this analogy. There is a typical analogy we use of the monkey and the termite. You're a farmer, and you're concerned that just about when you should be reaping your fruits from your fruit plantation, you see monkeys going to pluck the fruits, waste them. Monkeys, rodents. So you're setting traps. You're busy pursuing the monkeys that's eating your ripe fruits. But every time you come to that same farm, you overlook the termites that's littering everywhere in your farm, and the termite is interested in eating the roots of that tree. If that farmer continues to ignore the termites while pursuing monkeys and rodents, very soon there will be no tree, there will be no fruits, there will be no monkey, there will be no farmer.
And talk to me about what is playing out globally, because globally we see that countries who have succeeded in reducing or bringing down corruption focus more on fixing the systems than arresting individuals, than arresting people. What can Nigeria learn from international best practices about mitigating corruption within our system?
That's exactly the point I am making, that we are being essentially reactionary instead of looking at the systems of opacity that fuels the very act of corruption itself. And I make bold to say that in some instances it looks as if Nigeria was not designed to work. Was not designed to work ab initio. And I'll give you a typical example. You say you want to fight corruption. Even before we start all the reforms that we're currently pursuing and putting in place, our fundamental laws said, take bribery and corruption for instance. It says the giver and the receiver are equally guilty. Who does that? It takes somebody to report. Now, when you know that you cannot report bribery if you have not yet received it, or do you report intention to bribe? No, that's an intention. Bribery involves a giver and a receiver. And you say both the receiver and the giver are both guilty.
You think this is a disincentive?
Definitely. You're already saying don't report. Because for you to report, you're already guilty. Hello? Now, you get someone into office, you want that person to operate and function with integrity, transparency, and accountability, and you swear him or her in with an oath of secrecy. And then you remind him of the Official Secret Act, when in actual fact people should be sworn in by the oath of integrity and accountability to the people. You are swearing them in by the oath of secrecy, even 1.5 decades after the passage of the FOI Act in 2011. By the way, it took us solid decade to get the FOI Act in place. Pushing, begging. In other claims, it was a sunshine law that people embraced quickly. And following that FOI law, for instance, that seeks to mobilize people with access to information so they can join the fight against corruption, they also put in place right to information commissions to ensure there is enforcement of compliance. In Nigeria, 14 years after the passage of that law, we are still struggling. Up until this year, I could tell you, only 4 states had made any effort to domesticate or even adopt the FOI law. I'm just using that as an example. Graciously, FOI Council in Benin undertook a litigation against the applicability of the law, and today, rather than go cap in hand like I have done in the last decade for the program I manage, I literally go cap in hand, going to states to appeal for them to accept and implement the FOI
Why
Act.
do you think political figures don't prioritize fight against corruption?
Well, let me explain it this way. The fight against corruption basically says, stop all that has been your lifelong incentive. The average civil servant in Nigeria appears to spend a lifetime working, hoping for the day when it will become their turn to eat. Someone wrote, Michaela Wrong, after visiting Nigeria, went back and wrote a book which she called It's Our Turn to Eat, based on her experience in Nigeria. Following suit in that particular pattern, Honorable Wale Okediran, formerly of the 8th and 9th Assembly, wrote a book sequel to that, which he called Tenants of the House, based on his experience in the House of Assembly. And all of this is saying that the Nigerian civil servant literally waits a lifetime for their turn to eat. And when it's their turn, even if you want to, they tell you, hey, hold on for your turn. Now you're saying, you're bringing the fight against corruption. You are telling someone who have waited a lifetime for his turn, he was paying pittance. He was earning pittance, waiting for the day he will get to the position and it will be his turn to settle himself and his generations for life.
Is it fair, Doctor, to say that as a society, there is this silent acceptance that corruption is just a part of our life now?
You just said it.
Right.
It's pervasive, and I just told you it's turn by turn.
Right.
That's what we do here. It's turn by turn. Even when you're preaching to someone, you need to turn from this way. He will ask you, why in my own turn? Why would it get to my turn and you're asking us to change the rule? Why do we change the rule when it's my turn? But a cycle, no matter how perfect, must have a starting point. And for there to be any change, it's not about normative approaches that says, oh, government should do this, oh, the lawmakers should do this, this should. No. It's not about should and should. No. It's about put systems and structures in place that punish non-compliance. Trust me, you don't need too much awareness. You don't need too much awareness. What we need is enforcement. Because if anybody tells you he doesn't know the difference between right and wrong, it's a bloody lie. We all know what is right. We all do it intentionally because there is no consequence. And the day we will be able to address the issue of corruption in Nigeria is the day we find that man who lives by example, who lives above board, and who is ready to punish corruption. And I have my own thesis of what manner of punishments need to really follow different corrupt acts.
Right. We're going to double down on that in just a moment. But let's connect the dots. For Nigerians who are watching and saying, listen, why should we take this conversation serious? I mean, we've seen so many conversations that serve as a talk shop, much of them academic. The rhetoric has been ratcheted up. We've heard presidents say things like, if Nigeria doesn't kill corruption, corruption will kill Nigeria. But
very true.
The correlation itself is what really matters. So the United Nations and the OECD have linked corruption directly to insecurity, poverty, and some of the other structural problems that many nation states are dealing with, including service failure. How true is this connection, especially in Nigeria today?
It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. Corruption depletes the resources that should provide services for the people. Corruption erodes the very foundation of democracy. The foundation of democratic governance is that, democracy is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So if a people choose their leader definitely will work for the ultimate good of the people. So when you have a system where the few who govern look out for themselves, and in the face of high-level austerity, you're persuading everybody to go the austere path, but what the people are seeing is ostentatious display of lavish wealth, unbridled display. Yet you're wondering how come there is failure of everything. They will find ways to get even. They will find ways to get even. Therefore, the demonstration effect of unbridled corruption is the insecurity you see. The corruption itself takes away the resources that should educate the people. And that is the biggest challenge, even beyond corruption. As long as the people are not educated and they are not aware of their challenges and of the fact that someone is shortchanging them, how do you expect them to fight? Now that brings me to the actual definition of the character of corruption. Corruption is not like any other crime. For every other crime, there is a victim, there is a perpetrator, there is a victim. For the crime of corruption, there is the perpetrator, there is the beneficiary, there are, in some cases, other beneficiaries in between, and the victim is very far removed. And therefore, the victim who is supposed to protest, who is supposed to cry out for justice, for the most part, does not even know he or she has been shortchanged. Right. So how does he fight? How does he? You understand? So it's so terrible because the real sufferers, the real victims of corruption, most of the time, do not know where and how they were shortchanged.
Right. And looking at some African countries, we've seen some improve their transparency and accountability by adopting digital procurements, open budgets. How does Nigeria compare regionally to some of its counterparts on the continent who are dealing with similar challenges?
Yeah, Nigeria compares relatively fairly, I would say, primarily because of the support of development partners to the country. The development partners, for the most part, bring global comparative experiences, practices, procedures, processes to bear. And oftentimes they hold the feet of the agencies to the fire to ensure compliance to the global treaties and to the global arrangements that make other jurisdictions to fare well. So you come to Nigeria, you're seeing us implementing Open Government Partnership Initiative. You're seeing us bringing things like open budgeting, open procurement, and all of that. We're talking of even the Freedom of Information law that we're talking. They are all things that are being facilitated by development organizations. To that extent, you will see that there is a great measuring up in terms of trying to set up systems and processes in place. But where you are setting this up and there is still that gap in political will, there is still that gap. Let me give you a typical example. I was somewhere preaching to people in the extractive sector on the need to institute great measures, okay, that will facilitate transparency and reduce opacity. And one of them was very bold to say, hey, sir, we hear all you're saying. We will do our best to be transparent, but we will not be naked. What does that tell you?
Right.
Yeah, straight to my face. We will do our best to be transparent, but we will not be naked. What does that tell you? That means we'll play along with you. We'll play to the gallery. But trust me, we will not leave ourselves vulnerable for you to catch us.
Making the whole anti-corruption thing performative.
You understand what I mean?
Talk to me about this Nigeria exiting the Financial Action Task Force grey list. What do you think this impact will have, especially against serious crimes like money laundering and terrorism financing, which, as many Nigerians know at the moment, is something that we're dealing with? And also, talk to me about the whole idea of the national anti-corruption strategy, why this buy-in seems to be lacking over the years.
Okay, let me start with Nigeria's exit of the Financial Action Task Force grey list. That's a great achievement, I must say to you. And like I just said in my last submission, that most of the progress we are making is as facilitated by development partners. There are Nigerian agencies that also mean well, particularly the current leadership of the anti-corruption agencies. They are doing a whole lot, that I can tell you. They are doing a whole lot. First, there were these almost 84 recommendations by FATF for Nigeria to exit the grey list, because we needed to be seen as meeting their key expectations during the mutual evaluations that took place about the middle of this year, actually in the third quarter. Now, exiting the grey list basically says that we have made very concerted efforts to respond to the key shortfalls, which includes things like suspicious activities reporting, knowing your customers and customers' due diligence in our financial systems, being able to bring control over the designated financial institutions and the designated non-financial businesses, institutions, professionals, all of them, okay? Being able to bring them into check, ensuring that there is full reportage of financial flows across both financial and non-financial sectors. There are so many recommendations. I'm just using everyday language so people can understand what I'm talking about. Now, the implication of Nigeria being adjudged to have met basic requirements of integrity in terms of its financial management says there is great improvement, there is great coordination, there are some measure of control of illicit financial flows in the country, and therefore global confidence is returning to Nigeria as a destination where you can do business safely. Right. The implication of that, you would have noticed, is that Nigerian cards are now being accepted even on some global sites where ordinarily Nigerian financial instruments were not respected nor accepted. Right. So that is, and the implication of that is that it will increase the ease of foreign direct inflows into Nigeria, both in terms of investment, in terms of repatriation, in terms of people doing business. It would ease global and cross-border business, which would lead to growth and development. So it's a positive one, and we need to maintain it. But all of that effort, like I said, yes, most of it have been driven by the anti-corruption and the law enforcement agencies in the country. And I think that's one aspect where the government of the day has done well. We must give that to them. But beyond that, there is the need to now match, rhetorics with enforcement actions that put systems in place to ensure that everyone who misses step pays for it. Otherwise, we would still fall back. And this is not the first time Nigeria has been on the grey list. Right. I think this is about the third time we are getting into that grey list and coming out of it. So there is still the possibility of slippage if we don't guard our loins and do what we need to do.
And speaking about guarding our loins, as a final thought, the national anti-corruption strategy itself. We appear to have all these brilliant ideas on paper, but there is this obvious lack of buy-in, whether at the governmental level or at the societal level. What is happening in your view about why this buy-in is lacking, politically or even socially?
Well, I'll tell you that there is rising buy-in in the national anti-corruption strategy. I, in some sense, have driven, working with the Federal Ministry of Justice and other partners, we've driven the implementation of the national anti-corruption strategy. Yes, the buy-in could have been more robust than what we have now, but I can tell you for free that some states that have already adopted the national anti-corruption strategy have also moved it to the next level. And just part of it is that not much was done to popularize that strategy. And just a couple of weeks ago, the Federal Ministry of Justice held this national replication workshop for the national anti-corruption strategy, where, because initially the idea was to pilot it in few states, and we had 5 states, out of which 3 were very successful in adopting, domesticating, and piloting it within their own states. Now, we've just concluded the national replication workshop, wherein we brought key stakeholders from across the other states to Lagos in a very big one-week workshop, where they listened to those who have been implementing the strategy as a way to create incentive, to incentivize them to know that there is great value in implementing the strategy. And I assure you, over the next year, I see a lot of states latching on and driving their own anti-corruption strategies.
And on that positive note, Dr. Emmanuel Uche, thank you so much for an interesting conversation.
Thank
I appreciate you very much for the analysis. Thank you so much. That's our conversation with Dr. Emmanuel Uche, the project manager anti-corruption at International Idea in Nigeria. Coming up next on the program, we turn our attention to focus on electoral reform and the task ahead as we count down to 2027.